Everything looks better with a dram in your hand.
Hello and welcome to the Cask 88 lock-in, newly clean cut and dynamic. Now this isn't going to be an episode as you know it. The main episodes are becoming a monthly thing as everyone starts to get back towards their normal routines, but we still have stuff to share with you during the intervening moments. Now the Cask 88 lock-in has always been a white-hot, super sharp and on-the-pulse delivery system for Scotch whisky knowledge, and this has been partly possible thanks to excellent editing techniques. But sometimes editing can, well, let me show you. For some things, timing is very important. What just happened? You see, sometimes you just want to wallow in the moment, really absorb the full atmosphere of what's going on. Take your time with something. So we're releasing longer, more relaxed versions of the interviews with my former guests. Unreleased director's cut footage, allowing them really time to brew properly and let you get to know them a little better and appreciate the full picture. Just like a good cuppa or even a special whiskey. We're calling these the single cask interviews. My first is with Caroline Dewar, who knows more about whiskey than you do about the back of your own hand. So enjoy the first of the single cask interviews. For visionary people, there must be two ways of viewing the world. Either quiet satisfaction that their ideas have proved to be good over time, or frustration at the rest of us for always being a little slow to catch up. My next guest, Caroline Dewar, joined the whisky industry in the 1980s and has a history of developing good ideas long before they become received wisdom. She was an early proponent of the single malts, was responsible for the first set of official tasting notes, developed the Friends of Laphroaig fan club, and has long talked about the virtues of pairing food and whisky together. Naturally, it's also wonderful to have someone with such a connection with the Laphroaig distillery on the show, so we can learn a bit more about the place that made the whisky we chose for the third in our Scottish folklore series. Caroline Dewar, welcome.
Thank you.
Your whisky journey started in the 1980s with William Teacher and Sons. Now, did you have a love for whisky before you joined the company, or is that something that grew over time?
Oh, it grew very fast. I joined Teachers from an advertising agency. I thought when I left university that I wanted to work in advertising. And I did that for a few years, but wasn't using my language skills, wasn't using my marketing qualification. Teachers had an ad in the paper for an assistant brand manager for Europe, preferably who could speak Italian and Spanish. I applied and said, I don't, but I learn fast. I've got French and German. And a few weeks later, I had a job.
And heavy use of Italian and Spanish from that point onwards?
No, not at all.
Early on, your focus was the single malts, and this was a time when blended whisky was still very much ascendant.
When I joined Teachers, it was to look after teachers in Europe. The malts bit came a little later on, yeah.
So it was the early 80s when you joined Teachers. So at what sort of point did the focus start to shift towards the single malt?
Mid to late 80s, I would say. We felt that we needed to do more with the Glendronach. It was kind of being sold on the back of Teachers because it was used in the Teacher blend along with Ardmore and many other things. And I was given the task of basically bringing it on. And in the first year, we doubled its sales. I have to say, the sales weren't massive to start with. We were talking about 10,000 cases that we took up to 20. But we had a lot of work to do before we got to that stage, developing the brand's identity, its packaging, what the offering itself was. We actually had two styles to start with, Glendronach Original and Glendronach Sherry Cask, and let them find their own way in each market. But eventually the decision had to be taken, we need one or the other, and the sherry version won out.
And that's what we see now. In fact, Glendronach, absolutely beloved of people who really do hunt down single malts, and especially for sherry cask lovers. There's so many Glendronachs, and they all seem to be known for having a strong kind of sherry note to them. So it must be really vindicating to see that project that you started, you know, as you say, a small start of 10,000 to 20,000 cases, and to what it is now. I can't even imagine how many cases of Glendronach go out there.
I don't actually know myself. I should look it up and or phone them and ask them, to be honest. But yes, it's. I mean, I'm a sucker for a good sherry cask, I have to say. I enjoy them. But it's also nice that things that I had developed so early on, the Glendronach Distillery Company name with all the little curlicues round the name and the pastoral scene on the label, I had developed by a brilliant agency in London called Design House was their name, Design House in London. And they came up, we briefed them on what the distillery was about. We took them up there to see the location and they came up with those labels. And it's so great that they're actually still using them.
Yeah, so recognizable now, and dare I say it, iconic. And so this was as I sort of said in my introduction, you had a way of sort of sniffing out these trends that looked like they were really going somewhere. So I wonder if now, there are other trends of which may be about to grow, and other things that may have been traditionally overlooked, like, for example, grain whiskey, which is finding its feet in recent years. So to help those who would like to make grain whiskey a thing, would you share some of the challenges you had in communicating the virtues of single malts to a public who may have still been slightly suspicious of them?
Well, I have to say, I can't really think of any. I mean, it wasn't just me that had these ideas. It was a whole group of people that we worked with. I can't think of any particular challenges in the single malt sense. I think people by that time, we're talking about late 80s, beginning of the 90s, people were already becoming receptive and maybe looking for a next step or a challenge themselves. Tastes and more adventurous things to do with holidays and society were already prevalent. In a way, there was a bit of preaching to the almost converted. It was good targeting via good distributors. They knew the people that they wanted to get to. We put in place, or I put in place the strategies, the plans. As a group, we developed the promotional materials that we wanted the distributors to use. And we had good distillery stories as well. I'd had some practice in kickstarting a malt a bit further via the Glendronach. And also, taste is an important thing. The way of acquiring the malts was, and we had the Glendronach, we didn't really do anything with Ardmore. We bought Long John, so we acquired Laphroaig and Ardmore at that time as well. And then Hiram Walker with his malt. So we had a range to play with by then. So you have a bigger story to tell when you've got a range as well.
Something I saw that you were part of, developing the art of using tasting notes in whiskey, which actually is quite a recent phenomenon as well. How was it that got started?
Tasting notes. Well, I had been fortunate in that the marketing director I worked for at Teachers, he recognised and had come from a different part of the company himself into the whisky side. And we had a whole load of different drinks products within the company, which was Allied Lions to begin with, and then became Allied Distillers later. And I said I was interested in wines. And he said, well, we own wines, we own sherry, other things. The Wine and Spirit Education Trust run courses. You go and do the courses, pass the exams, and we'll pay. So I learned to write a tasting note doing that. When the team was first set up, it was all women, apart from our boss. We had 2 marketing managers, a PR and promotions manager, a graduate assistant, and our 2 secretaries. That's how I came to write the tasting notes. We were going to launch our little malt company, the Caledonian Malt Whisky Company. And I was asked, since I had this experience, would I write tasting notes for our brands that we had? So I sat down, wrote tasting notes. They were fairly top line because what I didn't want to do and what we didn't want to do was be too forceful and prescriptive in what was said about the whiskies. So give people a general idea and let them formulate their own words and their own ideas. And that's what I still like to do as well.
So erring towards the word fruity rather than the word just past ripeness passion fruit.
Yes, or as I heard at one tasting that I went to, it's a bit like orange skin. It's not really the skin, it's the bit just under the skin between the pith and the peel. And I'm thinking, okay, where did that come from?
I'm making this face because I do sometimes let myself go down that path if I'm ever doing some tasting notes.
But certainly in that first instance, we didn't want to be too detailed about it and let people run with their own imaginations as well.
Absolutely, and that has absolutely happened. You can see now in the sort of the modern world of single malts, imaginations have absolutely bloomed.
So you mentioned Laphroaig Distillery there as it came into the stable, and Laphroaig is something that actually I'm very happy to focus on for this episode, since this is the episode where we are revealing the identity of the third in our Scottish folklore series, which happens to use Laphroaig's spirit to represent the piece of folklore that we'd chosen, the Cailleach Beara. So to hear you talk more about Laphroaig would be a delight. And one thing that you really kicked off, another new idea, was the Friends of Laphroaig sort of fan club, which started very small. Could you tell me a little more about that, please?
The idea came from an agency in London called IMP, who were specialists in dealing with promotions ideas. And one of the things that we tried initially, and it was my colleague, the way it worked, there were two marketing managers and we split the world down the middle kind of thing. She looked after the UK and duty free, and I had basically most of the rest, where that was relevant to malt whisky. So it was quite a bit. And what we did was, in the UK, we put an ad, it was a 500-word story, and I think we did it as a test, and I think it might have been the Telegraph, targeting malt whisky drinkers, asking people to try and identify a whisky and to get in touch with, I think it was the UK distributor, and be sent out a little pack. And it was a mystery, and that was the little pack they received. And inside, you had that, which has no branding on it. Yeah, there we are, no branding whatsoever. But there was a little story in here with some tasting notes. And you were inviting people to taste that. And then once they'd done it, inside under here was the revelation of the brand and a card asking them some questions. So that was one aspect to start with. And it was also the sort of time that customer loyalty cards were just coming into the supermarket.
Okay.
So the agency also had a chat with the manager at Laphroaig. It was a wonderful man called Ian Henderson, who was there for quite a long time. And they came up with this idea, Friends of Laphroaig, to make consumers feel that they were actually attached and belonged to the brand. Mm-hmm. And so that there were no promises other than, keeping people up to date with what was going on at the distillery and so forth. And a lot of people bought into that. And then we've got a new marketing director a while later, a guy called Paul Hick, who was always having ideas. Told us he used to have his best ideas in his bath, which was way too much information. He came up with the square foot of Laphroaig idea. But the square foot thing was what then really took it off, because we had thousands of Friends of Laphroaig, and I do mean thousands. But the square foot took it on stages further. And we now, I shouldn't say we anymore, but old habits die hard, I have to say. There are now getting on for 900,000 Friends of Laphroaig out there, and invited people to become a friend of Laphroaig. If they were buying it to drink, obviously they were interested in it. But the great thing about the square foot as well is that people feel so tied to the brand in the island that they come to visit. If they visit their square foot, they get their rent, which is a miniature. They also get their certificate of their square foot. Now, that one's mine, and I have to say, as someone who was part of the team that kicked it off, my square foot number is 1,482. I thought it would be in the top 5 somewhere, but it's not.
You were late to your own party.
We've had people propose on their square foot. We've had people get married on their square foot. It's just a terrific story to tell.
And it's so apt as well, almost for Laphroaig, to have a square foot of land, because Laphroaig is known also for just being such an earthy, peaty, sometimes challenging to drink, but always incredibly full-bodied whiskey. Do you have a soft spot yourself for this style of Islay, peaty, earthy whiskey?
Oh, yes. I mean, I have a soft spot for all of the Islay whiskies and Jura as well. I mean, I love them all. There are some expressions that I like better than others, but such is life. But we also, I remember at the beginning when we were developing our first ad campaign for Laphroaig, which was a UK campaign, we had two themes. There was the difference between love and hate is a third of the way down the bottle. Because it's true for a lot of people. Laphroaig is something you need to try more than once to get to grips with it, to appreciate it. Although there are people who come to it first and love it, and other people who never will.
I've heard this, and I can definitely vouch for give it a chance if it doesn't chime immediately. I was 19 when I tried my first Laphroaig, and that was actually one of my first whiskies. And we did not get on well. I didn't make it a third of the way down the bottle, and so maybe I didn't give it the time it really needed to develop. Since then, Laphroaig and I are now firm friends. I'm delighted with this new Laphroaig that is going to be, our folklore series Laphroaig. No troubles with the flavour of that whatsoever. I've been completely won over. And this one happens to be 19 years old as well, so there's a kind of circularity to everything.
Can I just say as well that given the little I know of what your theme for this Laphroaig is, that we did also have another part of that ad campaign, another theme in it, which said, on Islay we get all 4 seasons in one day. Fairly relevant, really.
I think so, yeah, considering that we've gone with a sort of goddess who literally controls the weather. The fact that Islay seems to be particularly a target of her attentions, it does feel like a nice rhyme to it.
But being on the island as well is such a lovely experience, especially if you go by ferry. And the sail is gorgeous, but also even going in plane, okay, it only takes about half an hour at the most. And if it's a sunny day and you come in, because it only flies at about 8,000 feet, as you come into land, you fly past the distilleries, the Laphroaig, Lagavulin, Ardbeg along that line. And if it's a clear day, you can see right down into the sea through this lovely turquoise water. I would go over in the February every year to find out what the distilleries were planning to do for their festival day that year. And always the first day I was there, it was dazzlingly sunny but freezing cold. And everybody should see it that way as well. It's just a glorious place to be.
Now, something that we occasionally touch on, and actually we touched on a little earlier today, is that the Scotch whisky industry is now more open to women than it was traditionally. I suppose I'm not sure how much that's been your experience, but it's not to say that there haven't been some really notable characters in the historical epic of Scotch whisky. And Laphroaig, which we're still on the subject of, it was owned and managed around the early 20th century by Bessie Williamson. So what was her story, and how much did she bring to the sort of Laphroaig as it is now?
A great deal. Let me go back a little and just go back to the 19th century, where a bit like the Champagne world in France, there were a number of widows or veuves, as in Veuve Clicquot in Champagne, who took over distilleries as their husbands died. There were wives, daughters-in-law, sisters who worked and managed distilleries. But Bessie was different. She came from the point of view, she wasn't part of an owning family. She arrived on the island, she'd graduated, she was a chemistry graduate. She arrived on the island on a bit of time off, you could say. She'd seen an ad for a secretarial job. She got that and basically never left. She was such a hard worker. She got on very well with her boss, Mr. Hunter, and she worked so hard and he appreciated what she did so much that when he was off travelling, basically she was in charge. Bessie ran the place, and when he died, it was left to her. she was also, now we know that Glenfiddich were kind of the first into launching a single malt in the the mid 60s, you could say. Bessie was in the US, traveling and talking about Laphroaig and trying to punt that as a single malt and talk up single malt category in the mid 60s as well. So a lot of her work, because she actually ended up being a spokesperson for the whisky industry in the US as well. She did so much to generate the interest in Laphroaig as a single malt. And a lot of what happens in the whisky world today and for Laphroaig is down to her efforts as well. An astounding woman, really.
Now, one more thing that you've been advocating for a while and is gaining traction now in the last sort of 5-ish years, and just like Rachel McCormack, who we interviewed way back in episode 1, you've been advocating the pairing of whiskey with food for quite a while. And in fact, you organised one of the first whiskey dinners at a fèis on Islay. So how did that go down?
It went down very well. I mean, we came up with the idea because we were taking our whiskey tour clients over there, myself and Helen. We didn't always go with them, but we were booking them into things. And we decided that as a thank you to the island, we would put on, and I think it was the first whiskey dinner as part of the fèis, and possibly the first whiskey dinner over there. And I think it was 2003, and it was our way of saying thank you to the island and the distillers. And we did it in Port Charlotte, and I have kept doing it in Port Charlotte. And Bruichladdich was really the only distillery along that way at that time, and doing a fabulous job, as they still do. So we decided to do our dinner along there. And we had a full house, and it's continued to go well. It would have been on again this year had it not been for COVID-19.
Are there any particularly striking combinations that you remember from menus past?
Oh, gosh, no. Well, a couple of years ago, I used one of the new Jura range, Jura Journey, with a crab dish, with a crab and hay-smoked beetroot. And that worked particularly well. And, I mean, the whiskies are also versatile. I mean, it can be very easy in that Bowmore goes very well with seafood and fish. So what you don't want to be doing is get stuck in the lazy rut of saying, well, that would be great with a Bowmore. What you need to do is look at the others as well and see if there's something else that's at least as good, if not better. I have used Ardbeg with the tablet and the coffee at the end. I have used Ardbeg with main course. I have used Bunnahabhain with desserts and with ham hock terrines and various other things. I've used Laphroaig with dessert before. I used quarter cask because the dessert had coconut in it, and quarter cask has a hint of coconut about it. There are many, many notes you can play on these things, and it's such fun, although it can be quite stressful, trying to decide what goes with what. So you've got to know the whiskies and have examples and things as well to know what you're doing, and it's just good fun. It really is. I mean, I've done these dinners in other places. Most notably in Washington, D.C. for the Smithsonian. That was a fun one to go over and do. But my favourite, I think, is always going to be the one on Islay.
It has to be. It's where it started, and Islay is one of the most beautiful islands in the world. We can't speak two ways about it. It is gorgeous there.
It is. It's beautiful, and it's lovely to travel there and travel around there because as you're driving around, everybody sort of lifts a hand or a finger off the steering wheel to wave hi, and you know they're not from Islay if they don't do it. You see, so you have to learn. It's unlike Mull, where sometimes you think they're going to run you over. But
it was something we touched on a little with the fèis not happening this year. Is that everything's a little up in the air, a little topsy turvy. How has your work been affected, and are you running anything online that people might be able to get involved with during this time?
I am writing my twice monthly column for the Whisky Ambassador, but I'm not doing anything on video as you're doing. I occasionally tweet and so forth if I've got something I want to show a tasting note on or whatever. But I think it's good that all these things have had to develop because I think they will continue. Even after we're all, out of house arrest and all the rest of So I mean, what you're doing and what I've seen from other people, some of the distillers are doing themselves, are great fun, and long may it carry on.
Are there any sort of new trends shuffling around in whiskey that maybe some of us haven't noticed that have caught your eye and you think, aha, maybe this is heading somewhere?
Well, there's the interest, which of course I think I could say was kick-started or made more noticeable to me by Bruichladdich when they started experimenting with different barley strains. And of course, Mark who first opened, Mark Rainey, who first opened Bruichladdich up again, is now doing that at his Waterford distillery over in Ireland. And he's recently brought out 2 or 3 examples of whiskies using different barleys or barleys from different plots to see how they might be different. And I'm waiting for a couple of samples of those coming over. But it is an area of interest. I mean, maybe yeast is another one that people could look at. I don't know. So, yes, there are things that are developing which may or may not come to more.
May or may not, but I think the assumption is at this point that if you, Caroline Dewar, have thought that something might well prove to be a good idea, let's imagine that in 5 to 10 years, terroir is going to be the next big thing in single malt Scotch.
Well, we'll find out. I mean, I know there's somebody whose book I was reading recently who said that, it goes through a distillation process. Surely this can't account for much, that the barley is from a certain piece of ground or whatever. But time will tell. It's just at such an early stage. I don't think we can really know.
Absolutely. It's starting to feel almost like received wisdom now. Oh, it's so heavily distilled, it can't retain anything of its original character. But I think that is a story that is being left behind as we go forward.
Well, I'm interested in finding out. Let's put it that way.
Well, I have to say, it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you this afternoon. Caroline Dewar, thank you so much for joining us today.
And to you. And I was going to wear my Laphroaig rugby shirt, but my other half, who's out in the garden, said, Caroline, don't you think that's just a bit overdoing it?